Thank you, Mr. President. Let me just begin by commenting on a few of the thoughts raised by my good friend, Senator Enzi. Senator Enzi says that the economy today is not where it should be, and he's right. I don't think anybody thinks that the economy is where it should be in terms of low unemployment, high wages. No debate about that. But I ask the American people to think back 6.5 years ago, at the end of President Bush's term, to what the economy was like. At that point, we were not gaining the 200,000 jobs a month that we're gaining now. We were losing 800,000 jobs a month. At that point, the deficit was not at $480 billion where it is today. It was at $1.4 trillion. At that point, the stock market was not soaring as it is today. The American and world's financial system was on the verge of collapse. So let's begin by putting issues into perspective. No, nobody that I know thinks of that we are where we should be economically in America today. But anybody who does not understand, despite enormous Republican obstructionism, that we have made significant gains over the last 6.5 years would, I believe, be very mistaken. Mr. President, as we all know, the federal budget that we are working on now is not an appropriations bill. It does not provide explicit funding for this agency or that agency. What it does do is lay the foundation for that process, the total amount of money that the appropriations committees have to spend. In other words, this budget is more than just a very long list of numbers. The federal budget is about our national priorities and our values. It is about who we are as a nation and what we stand for. It is about how we analyze and assess the problems that we face and how we go forward in resolving those problems. That is the task that the Senate now is about to undertake, and it is a very, very serious responsibility. Mr. President, let us be very clear. No family, no business, no local or state government can responsibly write a budget without first understanding the problems and the challenges that it faces. And that is even more true when we deal with a federal budget of some $4 trillion. And as I examine the budgets brought forth by the Republicans in the House and here in the Senate, this is how I see their analysis of the problems facing our country. At a time of massive wealth and income inequality, perhaps the most important issue facing this country, a huge transfer of wealth from the middle class to the top 0.1%, my Republican colleagues apparently believe that the richest people in America need to be made even richer. It is apparently not good enough for my Republican colleagues that 99% of all new income today is going to the top 1%. Not good enough. It is apparently not good enough that the top 0.1% today own almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. Clearly, in the eyes of my Republican colleagues, the wealthy and the powerful and the big campaign contributors need even more help. Not only should they not be asked to pay more in taxes, not only should we not eliminate huge loopholes that benefit the wealthy and large corporations, some of my Republican friends believe that we should protect these loopholes, not change them at all, or maybe even make them wider. It's apparently not good enough that corporate America is enjoying record-breaking profits and that the CEOs of large corporations earn some 290 times what their average employees make, 290 times more. Apparently not good enough that since 1985, the top 0.1% has seen a more than an $8 trillion increase in its wealth than it would have if wealth inequality had remained the same as it was in 1985. An $8 trillion increase in wealth going to the top 0.1%. But apparently my Republican colleagues not only do not talk about this issue, they will do nothing to address the massive wealth and inequality that this country faces. It is apparently not good enough for my Republican colleagues not to be dealt with that the wealthiest 14 people in this country, 14 people, have seen their wealth go up by more than $157 billion over the past 2 years alone. 14 people saw an increase in their wealth by $157 billion, and the Republican budget talks about cutting food stamps and education and nutrition because we are presumably a poor nation. Well, we're not a poor nation. We just have massive wealth and income inequality, so that the vast majority of people are becoming poor, but people on top are doing phenomenally well. That is a reality that we must address. Mr. President, as manifested in the House and Senate budgets, my Republican colleagues are ignoring a very significant reality, and that is that millions of middle-class and working families, people who are often working longer hours for lower wages, people who have seen significant declines in their standard of living over the last 40 years, what my Republican colleagues say, well, those people who are struggling, those people who are trying to feed their families, those people who are trying to send their kids to college, those are not the people that we should be helping. Rather, we got to worry about the top 1%. Madam President, at a time when over 45 million Americans are living in poverty, and that is more than almost any time in the modern history of our country, and many of these people are working people. People are working 40 or 50 hours a week at substandard wages. My Republican colleagues think we should increase poverty by ending the Affordable Care Act, by slashing Medicaid, by cutting food stamps and the Earned Income Tax Credit. At a time when almost 20% of our kids live in poverty, the highest rate of childhood poverty in the industrialized world, my Republican colleagues think that maybe we should even raise that poverty rate a little bit among our children by cutting child care, by cutting Head Start, by cutting the refundable child tax credit, and maybe let's even go after nutrition programs for hungry children. Madam President, to summarize, the rich get much richer, and the Republicans think they need more help. The middle class and working families of this country become poorer, and the Republicans think we need to cut programs they desperately need. Frankly, those may be the priorities of some of my Republican colleagues, but I do not believe that these are the priorities of the American people. Madam Chairman, today, the United States shamefully remains the only major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to all people as a right. Today, despite the modest gains of the Affordable Care Act, we still have about 40 million Americans who lack health insurance and millions more who are underinsured. And what is the Republican response to the health care crisis? They want to abolish, do away with completely, the Affordable Care Act and take away the health insurance that 16 million Americans have gained through that program. So here you have 40 million people who have no health insurance, and Republican responses, Well, let's make it 56 million people. And if you add the massive cuts they propose to Medicaid and the Children's Health Insurance Program, even millions more would lose their health insurance. Does anybody for 1 second think that this vaguely makes any sense in the real world? People are struggling to try to find health insurance, and the response is, oh, let's cut 56 million, let's cut 16 million people off of the Affordable Care Act and millions more off of Medicaid. And while the Senate budget resolution does not end Medicare as we know it, unlike the House budget last year, it does make significant cuts. Further, when you make massive cuts to Medicaid, it is not only health insurance for low-income people who suffer, you're also cutting the nursing home care for seniors. These are elderly people, 80, 90 years of age, in a nursing home, and one might argue that these people are the most vulnerable people in this country, the most helpless people, fragile people, and we're going to cut programs for them. Now, Madam Chair, Chairman, I've talked a little bit about the devastating impact that the House and Senate Republican budgets would have on the American people. But I think it is equally important when you look at a budget to talk about not only what a budget does, but to talk about what a budget does not do, the serious problems that it does not address. Madam President, poll after poll tells us that the American people, when asked what their major concerns are, what they almost always respond is saying it is jobs, wages, and the economy. That's generally speaking, Democrats, Republicans, independents respond, it's the economy, jobs, and wages. Despite a significant improvement in the economy over the last 6 years, real unemployment today is not 5.5%, it is 11%, counting those people who have given up looking for work and those people who are working part-time. Youth unemployment, an issue that we almost never discuss, is at 17%, and African-American youth unemployment is much higher than that. What the American people want and what the Republican budget completely ignores is the need to create millions of decent-paying jobs. I think you go out to Maine, to Vermont, to Wyoming, to California. You ask people what they want, and they would say, we need more jobs, and those jobs should be paying us a living wage. In my view, and in the view of many economists, if we are serious about creating jobs in this country, the fastest way to do it is to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure, our roads, bridges, water systems, wastewater plants, airports, rail, dams, levee, broadband in rural areas. According to the American Society of Civil Engineers, we need to invest over $3 trillion by the year 2020 just to get our nation's infrastructure in good repair. And when we make a significant investment in an infrastructure, we create millions of decent-paying jobs, which is exactly what we should be doing and what our side of the aisle will fight for, but it is an issue virtually ignored by the Republican majority. Crumbling infrastructure, need to create jobs, they don't talk about it. Madam President, at a time when millions of Americans are working for starvation wages and when the federal minimum wage is an abysmal $7.25 an hour, we need a budget that substantially increases wages for low-income and middle-income workers. In the year 2015, no one who works in this country for 40 hours a week should be living in poverty. I would hope that that is a tenet that all of us could agree on. No one should be making the totally inadequate federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. Raising the minimum wage to at least $10.10 an hour, I personally would go higher than that, would not only be good for low-wage workers, it would reduce spending on Medicaid, public housing, food stamps, and other federal programs by some $7 billion a year. Sadly, when I offered an amendment in committee that called for a substantial increase in the minimum wage, Not one of my Republican colleagues voted for it. Well, we're going to give them an opportunity to rethink the error of their ways. We are going to bring an amendment onto the floor to do exactly what the American people want, that is significantly increase the minimum wage in this country so that no one who works 40 hours a week lives in poverty. Madam President, we also need pay equity in this country so that women do not make 78 cents on the dollar compared to what a man makes for doing the same work. Further, we need to address the overtime scandal in this country, in which many of our people are working 50 or 60 hours a week, but fail to get time and a half for their efforts. I haven't heard, I sat through all of the committee meetings, budget committee meetings, was at the markup on Thursday, didn't hear one Republican word about the need for pay equity for women workers, about the need to address the overtime scandal, about the need to raise the minimum wage. These are the issues the American people want addressed. But look high and low in that long Republican budget, you'll not find one word addressing these issues. Madam President, I can tell you that in Vermont, and I suspect every state in this country, young people and their families are enormously frustrated by the high cost of college education and the horrendously oppressive student debt that many of them leave school with. In fact, student debt today at $1.2 trillion is the second largest category of debt in this country, more than credit card debt and auto loan debt. Does the Republican budget do anything to lower interest rates on student debt? No. In fact, their budget would make a bad situation even worse by eliminating subsidized student loans and increasing the cost of a college education by about $3,000 for some of the lowest income students in America. Does the Republican budget support or comment on President Obama's initiative to make 2 years of community college free? Or do they provide any other initiative to make college affordable? Sadly, they don't. But what they do is cut $90 billion in Pell Grants over a 10-year period, which will make college even more expensive for about 8 million low-income college students. Madam President, my Republican colleagues say that they are concerned about the deficit, which, by the way, has been reduced by more than 2/3 since President Obama has been in office. And we should be clear, this side of the aisle is concerned about the deficit. My Republican colleagues are concerned about an $18 trillion national debt, which has skyrocketed in recent years. And one of the reasons that it has skyrocketed is that we went to war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the experts tell us that by the time we take care of the last veteran, those wars may cost over $5 trillion. And my deficit hawk friends on the Republican side, how did they pay for those wars? What taxes did they raise? What programs did they cut? They didn't. They put it on the credit card. That's how they paid for it. And I would tell you, Madam President, what concerns me very much is apparently 2 wars unpaid for is not enough for my Republican colleagues. In the committee markup, they put another $38 billion into defense spending on the credit card off budget. So I think we should ask ourselves, how does it happen that to move toward their balanced budget approach, they want to cut nutrition, education, health care, virtually every program that working families need, but when it comes to defense spending, another $38 billion. That's not chump change. Even here in Washington, that's off budget. No problem. Just add it to the deficit. Madam President, when we talk about sensible ways of addressing our deficit or sensible ways of addressing our national debt, you cannot ignore the reality that major corporation after major corporation in a given year pays what in taxes? 20%, 10%, 5%, 0%. Profitable corporations like General Electric, Verizon, Boeing, and many others have not only paid nothing in federal income taxes in some recent years, they actually get rebates from the IRS. Can we talk about that issue? Or is the only way toward a balanced budget to cut programs for the elderly, the children, the sick, and the poor? According to a recent report from the Congressional Research Service, each and every year profitable corporations are avoiding about $100 billion in taxes by stashing their profits in the Cayman Islands. The point that I was making is if we are serious about reducing the deficit, it is inconceivable that one does not look at the fact that corporation after corporation is paying zero in federal income tax. It is inconceivable that we do not recognize that in 1952, corporations contributed about 32% of all federal tax revenue. Today, they contribute about 11%. It is inconceivable that we do not understand that according to the CRS, each and every year, profitable corporations are avoiding $100 billion, $100 billion in taxes. How can you not look at that issue? How could your only approach be to make it harder for kids to go to college or for little children to be in the Head Start program? So, Madam President, I look forward to the debate that we will be having over the next several days. I suspect there will be a lot of amendments being offered. And I think it's fair to say that on this side of the aisle, what the amendments will be saying is that we need to create millions of jobs. We need to raise wages in America. We need a tax system that is fair and does not contain loopholes that allow the wealthy and large corporations to avoid paying their fair share of taxes. We need a budget that says women workers should earn the same as male workers. We need a budget that says we have got to rebuild our crumbling infrastructure. So I think there will be a lot of very serious debates. I think the differences between the two sides will become pretty apparent. And I hope the American people pay strong attention to this discussion. And with that, Madam President, I would yield.